Hello, YouTube. I'm Vince White. I'm an employment attorney, and on this channel, we answer publicly posted questions from YouTube users, getting folks the answers they need from an employment attorney. I think 4 or 5 people, maybe closer to 10 people, honestly, have asked this question. So I'm going to read some of the questions just so you all believe me, because every time I say somebody asked a question, I don't read it. People are like, nobody asked that question. Presidente Trump has listen. I think there's been a lot of executive orders, but one of the executive orders was to repeal an old executive order tied to some civil rights stuff with federal contractors. So I'm going to read the questions. We're going to get into it because it seems to have folks in a bit of a tizzy, and let's get down to it. First person I see asking is Keypoint Avenue. YouTube user Keypoint Avenue says, Hi, Keypoint Avenue. How does the new executive order on DEI, diversity and inclusion, affect pending racial discrimination cases? Kenor Harrison 8198 says, Hi, what does the EEOC case mean if Trump put a pause on everything DOJ? He did not. Palm Data 5923 says, Hi, Vince. How will the EEOC and federal courts consider discrimination cases with the change in direction of DEI? What happens if the discrimination happened under the old EO that promoted DEI, but what is now being brought in mediation or federal court under the new EO? Do they consider the evidence in light of the former DEI policy, or will they consider the evidence in terms of the new executive order that bans DEI? I am an older male who was laid off under a federal agency's DEI initiative and replaced by a young female. Just wanting to know what to expect with these changes. I always appreciate your straight answers. Thanks. And then one more. C-Note 1906. Hi, Vince. What do Trump's executive orders mean for employment law? Will equal employment laws just disappear? Thanks. Okay. First and foremost, the Equal Employment Opportunity Commission is an agency established by a statute that was voted in by Congress and then signed in to law by the executive branch, the president, many moons ago. Now, since it was originally signed into law, the EEOC has been granted additional powers that was also granted in part via statute. Now, I will note, President Obama and at a couple other points along the way, other presidents did grant some additional power to the EEOC, or some additional directives to the EEOC over the intervening decades. And although Presidente Trump has not cast those down yet, to my knowledge, theoretically he could be able to do so. Now, what has Trump actually done? I'm going to post down below a link from Senor Bezos's Washington Post, in which he, in which a journalist working for the Washington Post lays out what has actually happened and what it actually means. So the link will be in the doobie-doo down below. But if you want to hear me talk about it, let's do it. All right. So Executive Order 11246 directed federal contractors only. Statistically speaking, it is unlikely that you are a federal contractor. There are many federal contractors, but they are a flash in the pan compared to the private employees of the United States or even the direct federal employees of the United States. These are federal contractors only. And this executive order directed federal contractors to take affirmative action. That's a key word. Remember that word? I remember being a lad doing my Latin homework, listening to my grandparents. I think it was they were watching 60 Minutes, and there was like a piece vilifying affirmative action. Affirmative action did a lot of good. I think without question, but it hasn't really been popular in the United States for a while. We've moved to other things like diversity and inclusion, which is a little bit different. Fundamentally, it's diversity and inclusion. And let me just give the caveat, because there's always somebody. I deeply value diversity. Inclusion matters. I've devoted my career to fighting discrimination in the workplace. I believe in these things. So some idiot's going to be really mad when they watch this video, and they're going to say I'm dismissing what's going on. I'm not. I'm just trying to be accurate. And two, these things matter fundamentally and deeply. Okay. So that executive order told federal contractors to take affirmative action to end discrimination at their firms, and gave the Labor Department enforcement authority over violations found by the EEOC. Let's face it. The Labor Department very rarely exercised that authority. Not that meaningful in the scheme of things. The EEOC is a failed agency. It was a failed agency under Obama. It was a failed agency under Bush. It was a failed agency under Clinton. It just doesn't do a lot. I have a video posted recently. I think last year they filed like 80 cases total. Out of the I don't know. Don't quote me on the numbers. Watch the video itself. I'll link the video here, I guess. But out of like 80,000 cases, if I recall correctly, they filed like, I think 50 to 80 litigations total. They're not moving the heavens for diversity and inclusion. Let's be honest. They're a flash in the pan at best. And listen, it's not always really even the best thing to have government attorneys litigating your case. If they were really good attorneys, they wouldn't work for the government, where they will be poor. They would be in private practice making bank, because they're amazing attorneys and they can make hundreds of thousands, if not millions or tens of millions per year. And I'm not saying like the only reason to work in this field is money, but I am saying if you work in private practice, you will help a lot more people and make a lot more money and have a much better quality of life. Working for the government is kind of a drag, especially the feds. And I know a lot of federal employees, and they like to brag about how they work 2 hours a day and all this stuff. I guess if that's your thing, maybe that's what you want. But realistically speaking, the talent doesn't go to the feds. Let's just be real. Talent doesn't go to the feds. Talent goes defense side or plaintiff side, depending on what kind of talent you have. And I would be uncomfortable if my case or my family member's case was being litigated by the DOJ or the Department of Labor, frankly. But I digress. So listen, this executive order, it was, and I'll quote the Washington Post, it was one in a series of laws and executive orders that codified the employment protections that existed for the American workforce for decades. True statement, very broadly written, a little hysterical. It was really, realistically, it touched on federal contractors. They go on, the policy was considered a major step in the federal government's effort to foster racial equality. Yeah, not really. I'll tell you what a major step was. The Civil Rights Act of 1964, and then the expansion of the Equal Employment Opportunity Act in 1972. Those were major steps. Those are very meaningful. Also, things done by Congress, right? Statutes voted on by elected officials, not a sweeping signature of the pen on an executive order. That's not really how we're supposed to be making laws. And, I don't, let me be clear. I don't love I don't want executive order 11246 to be rescinded. I don't want that. I don't support that. The hand wringing over the fact that it has been rescinded, drama, a little bit, a little bit, right? Like it wasn't doing a lot of good, based on my experience as an employment attorney. Now, I think a more important conversation might be, hey, how can we do better? So, diversity and inclusion. Diversity in the workplace matters. Representation is deeply important. How do we achieve that? I would argue, looking around here in New York City, we could start by not having fake schools for people of color in poor neighborhoods. Like we could use our massive tax burden to provide real schools with like educators who can read and teaching implements that work, and we could invest in those schools in a meaningful way instead of like throwing resources at primarily white schools and just kind of looking at the Bronx and certain parts of Queens and Brooklyn and saying, I guess I don't really know what New York City says. I feel like New York City is like, oh, I hope they kill each other off in those neighborhoods because they're not investing to help people. That's my take on how New York City's run. And I think if you start revamping school systems to get people actual equal education, you're going to have a lot more representation in a variety of workforces. That's just a thought. I mean, fundamentally, like, we can do a lot of things like affirmative action, like DEI, but 40% of the people working DEI jobs are con artists, and the other 60% meanwhile are doing well, but like it just hasn't been implemented in a particularly thoughtful or valuable way. You got people, I know we've talked about Mark Cuban posting things on the internet, on the tweeters, and then the head of the EEOC comes in and is like, hey, BT dubs, Mark Cuban, some of the things you're saying are like fundamentally illegal. Like those things are illegal under the law of the land, under the anti-discrimination statutes of the United States. And Mark Cuban's like, no, they're not. And the EEOC director is like, yep, they are, and I'm the one who decides they are, because I'm the one in charge of the agency that adjudicates these laws. So I assure you they have been for 30, 40, 50 years, depending on, I guess, when we're talking. And those laws should be expanded. There should be more protections against discrimination in the workplace. The damages should be increased for violations of those laws. There's a lot of things that I would do, certainly, to beef up the protections against discrimination in the workplace. There's a lot you could do to change the law on failure to hire cases. Failure to hire cases are way too risky for many smaller firms. Our firm does take them, but like they're lower value, higher risk because, listen, there's a lot to be said for like, hey, we interviewed 100 people and we hired one, and now you're saying it's discrimination, but like, excuse me, prove it. Like, how do you prove it, right? To some extent, and those cases can be tough. And I would argue probably that lowering the burden of evidence or increasing the potential pool of damages on a failure to hire case would do worlds more to push representation, diversity, and inclusion than because you're going to have private firms taking those cases. So you're going to have real attorneys, capable attorneys, who can then afford to take those cases because either the risks have been mitigated or the potential upside has been increased. So they're able to, drop hundreds of attorney hours and tens of thousands of dollars into these cases. And I would say that would be a more meaningful approach than this executive order, which was a good, well-meaning executive order that I am frustrated that it is being phased out. But, how much good was it doing? Could it have done more good? If we look at what it achieved over time, it did some good. No question. I think no question it did some good. Was it the most effective thing? Have we learned that there might be more effective paths to fostering diversity and inclusion in the workplace? I think we know there are more effective paths now, right? I mean, we were when this executive order went in, folks were getting started with this stuff. They didn't really know that much. A lot of things sounded real good, and with all things government, sometimes things sound good and they don't really work out the way you hope they might. And don't get me wrong, Trumpy's, the guy seems like an asshole. Not saying he's doing this because he's going to roll out some kind of better protection. Let's not kid ourselves, right? But I am saying, we could go elect Congress people to vote in statutes that codify better protections, more meaningful protections, more effective protections, and that might be a more meaningful approach than hoping that we'll vote a president in who will make all the right executive orders. Notably, listen, Mr. Biden, Presidente Biden, didn't not someone I would view as particularly great for the American labor force, right? Which is odd because the fellow was elected on the backs of unions, but notably he did appear to drive those same unions into the arms of the red wave, and they weren't being irrational when they did that. Those unions were like, "Hey, you seem like you're doing bad things to us," and you had some good nominations to the FTC and the NLRB, and they did some amazing things, but then you utterly refused to support them in any visible way, President Biden. So, it's a bit iffy. It's a bit questionable which party is really on the side of labor these days. Fundamentally, I would say the progressives are, and that might be it. Bernie and the progressives are the only party that I'm aware of that seem to be on the side of labor, organized labor, employee rights. The DNC is fully in the jaws of corporate capture, and the Republicans appear to be fully in the jaws of one Donald Trump. So it might make more sense if you want to vote in additional protections and you want to push inclusion and diversity in the workplace, that you look a little harder, one, at your local politicians and get local and state laws voted in that give you protections where you are, which notably may not give the protections back to these federal contractors, right? But again, statistically, you're probably not a federal contractor. Two, we can vote for the House of Reps and senators and hold those people individually accountable for the way they vote, right? We can get their voting record, and we can go line by line and be like, well, here you screwed with workers, you screwed with workers here, you screwed with workers here. Oh, this is good. You did it over here, you did something good. And we can give them a scorecard for how they voted with respect to workers' rights and diversity and inclusion. And those statutes are much more permanent and lasting and can be far broader and more powerful than, frankly, any executive order should be. Although apparently presidents can just have endless war now and do whatever they want without anything from Congress at all, which is concerning in its own right, because we've had a series of, I don't know, vegetables and bad guys, and I won't say who's who, going back my entire adult life. Certainly. So let's not forget we had a war criminal back in the early aughts. But we had two war criminals. We had a 1-2 president vice president war criminal duo. But I digress. Yeah, this is not good news. This sucks. But the EEOC is not going away. You can still bring your private litigations. You can still sue for workplace discrimination. You can still sue for sexual harassment. You have those rights to go on to federal court. You have the right, potentially, depending on where you are, to file that case also in state court. You may also have local laws that protect you. Your rights are not being wiped out. And President Trump would be very hard-pressed to wipe out your rights if that was something he was trying to do. And he doesn't seem great at the details on anything. So I think this is like an easy press thing he can do that doesn't cause him too much trouble and not too much work for him. And, sounds like a good soundbite, but probably not going to change the world for most people all that much. Listen, I'm not going to lie to you. Federal contractors with protected classes will feel a difference. Without question. And if you're a federal contractor and you're experiencing workplace discrimination, talk to an attorney sooner rather than later. Schedule 3 to 5 free consultations. Discuss your rights, know your rights, document everything all the way through. And you still have rights. You still have protections. You're going to have to be a little more proactive. What it comes down to. You're going to have to be a little bit more proactive if you're a federal contractor. And if you're trying to become a federal contractor, you're trying to get a job with a federal contracting company, I don't know what that's going to look like in 90 days. This revocation goes into effect in 90 days, I believe. So, it goes into effect on April 20th. A full 90 days after Trumpy signed the bill, signed the executive order. That's probably all I have to say about this. I hope it answers all your questions. If this helped in any way, like, subscribe, comment down below, share our channel so it can grow. Take care, everyone.